Member of this organization since 2011. He had a sort of a gap in his membership. He was in the club as a young teen 5 or 6 years ago.
5 or 6.
He's also a member of the Seven Ponds Astronomy Club. He's an engineer in the area, works in the area, and before that he was an avionics technician with the U.S. Coast Guard. And he's currently serving on the board of this organization as our Observatory Chairman. Involves a lot of work. And his presentation tonight is called Wide Field Astrophotography. Joe?
Thank you. Joe. Welcome, everybody. So Dale kind of stole some of my thunder and part of my introduction, but I grew up not too far from here. I grew up right here in Warren. I lived out of state during my years in the Coast Guard and raised my family out in Dryden near Seven Ponds Astronomy Club. I moved recently to Waterford, and that's where I live now. I've been a freelance photographer for many years, and while I enjoy making money at it, it's not, I kind of consider myself more an enthusiast than a professional photographer, but I do get paid from time to time. That's nice. Like astronomy, my interest in photography goes back to when I was an early teen. I remember when I was younger, my dad would bring home, he brought me a school camera. He was a teacher in Warren Consolidated. And he brought me home a school camera and handed it to me. It was an old Yashica twin lens reflex. It shot medium format film. And he would hand me a dozen rolls of black and white film. And I would shoot whatever I thought looked interesting, and I'd hand him the spent rolls. And a week later, I would get all these photos back. And on the back of the photos, the photographers at the studio would write, they'd critique my photos and talk about composition and depth of field and exposure. And they would make remarks on the back. Some of them were a little harsh, I think, but for a 12-year-old or a 13-year-old kid. But I learned a lot. I learned a lot from that. I look back at it now, it's all a little shady, you know, going through all those rolls of film and never having to pay for them. But then my last name is a little bit of a notorious ring to it, so I guess it's acceptable. We talk about doing night photography, night landscape photography, and you know, if you live in downtown Detroit, you're not going to image stars. But it doesn't mean that there isn't something interesting to shoot when you are watching the sunset. So you don't have to necessarily get hung up on a lack of stars. But we are here to talk about stars tonight, starlight. Of course, night landscapes can be about stars. They can be about something in the foreground, or they can be about combining both of them. This image was out in Arizona, a friend of mine, and actually some people here probably know Stephen Agus, used to be in the club. But he built this 36-inch telescope that he's got out in the desert there. I'm fortunate to go out once a year because the images in the 36-inch telescope are like no others. If you don't mind climbing to the top of that 12-foot step ladder, of course. Wow. So what kind of equipment do you need? Well, I shoot with the DSLR, a Nikon. I have 2 cameras. I have a D7100, which is what they call a crop sensor, which we'll talk about in a little bit. And I have a D750, which is a full frame sensor. It's not important what kind of camera you're shooting with, as long as you have controls over a few things. So what is important is the lens. It's like your telescope. You know, if you have a shoddy, inexpensive, cheap telescope, it's not going to give you images like a real high quality precision instrument. Lenses for photography are no different. The best images come from what you would call, or what a photographer would call, fast glass, something that has a very low f ratio, okay, or f-stop. F ratio and f-stop are kind of different between telescopes and cameras, so you can't really factor it in the same way. But in general, just a general way to think about it is anything below f2 is considered extremely fast. Actually, f2.8 is extremely fast. Anything above f5 is considered slow. So most of the images that I shot that I'm going to show tonight were shot with a 1.8 lens, which is extremely fast. It's only a 35 millimeter, which on one of my cameras shoots like a 50 millimeter, and on my full-frame camera shoots, well, ironically, it shoots like a 50 millimeter on that too, but that's another story.
Joe, what do you mean by fast and slow for a novice?
The ability for it to get light onto the sensor. Okay. When you talk about a fast scope, a fast telescope,
Yes.
you're not necessarily talking about light gathering. You're talking about your f ratio, which is the actual width of the objective compared to the focal length. And in cameras, it's not really that way because you know the lenses it doesn't jive. You know, you can't do math to figure out a certain aperture lens has, you know, a certain f-stop. But ultimately, a camera lens with a lower f-stop is going to deliver more light more quickly to the sensor than a camera with a longer f-stop, regardless of the size of the lens.
So you can take a shorter exposure and not have the stars trail. With a slower lens, it's a longer exposure, the stars are going to drift.
Right, right. So, and that's the whole key, is that we're able to take a lens that's fast with a low f-stop and image a shorter period of time, or image for the same amount of time and gather more light. And you'll see some examples of this as we go through. So having a really good quality lens doesn't mean a lot of money. The lens that I'm shooting with is under $200, and on a full-size digital SLR, that is a very inexpensive lens. You could spend $8,000 to $10,000 on a camera lens. So under $200 is pretty cheap.
Your fast lens, do you actually shoot at 1.8 or do you shut it down a little?
Sometimes I shut it down, and it depends on what I'm trying to do. But for the most part, I have it wide open, and I shoot at 1.8. The other things that you need are a remote shutter release. You don't want to touch the camera when you trip the shutter. And you know, if you're going to be out there for a period of time, it's no different than a telescope. It's a big piece of glass exposed to the night air. You're going to need a dew heater, or I carry a little camp-style hair dryer that plugs into a battery, and you know, just blow the dew off the camera lens as it's imaging. It doesn't affect it in any way. Things that are important: very steady tripod on very steady ground. If you are out on a lake and you put your tripod out at the end of a dock, you may have an incredible view, but the minute somebody steps on the dock, the waves hitting the stanchions of the dock are going to cause minute vibrations, and it's going to transfer into your images. You need to be on solid ground with a very steady tripod. Cameras with sensitive sensors are helpful, and you want to have control over your aperture, control over your shutter speed, meaning the camera needs to operate in manual mode, and ideally you want to be able to have control over ISO, which is the sensitivity of the camera. If there's anybody that's an electrical engineer, we're talking about gain, right? If you turn the gain up on an audio amplifier or on an electronic circuit, it becomes more, you get higher output from it, but with output you get a lot of noise, right? So there's kind of a fine line that you have to walk, where you have the best operation with the least amount of noise. Lower ISO corresponds to like the old ASA days. any of you, I'm sure some of you remember that from the film days.
Yeah.
But a slow ISO film or a slow ISO sensor is going to take images that are, they take longer to collect the light, but they do it with very little grain, very little noise, which is the same as grain in the old film days. And you want to shoot in what they call raw mode. And basically the camera collects the image. It does some processing, but it keeps the file size and the file structure in kind of a, all the data it collects, it keeps all in that image. And you can output that as a JPEG or a TIFF or some other file format, but when you do that, you kind of limit what you can do with the image afterward. So you get the most post-processing, the most manipulation from your images if you keep the image in raw mode and then import it into, you know, nobody uses darkrooms anymore, right? Now your darkroom is your laptop, and you're running a photo processing software like Lightroom or Photoshop or, you know, Adobe seems to, you know, corner the market, so most of them are Adobe products. If anybody has any questions, you can kind of stop me.
Isn't a TIFF file a lot larger pixel than?
They typically are, but I don't understand the.
TIFF, I don't think it does any compression.
Okay, if you have any questions about image formats, we can talk afterward.
Okay.
Yeah, and don't ask me because I'm limited knowledge there.
But you do want to use RAW.
Yeah.
You definitely want to shoot in RAW if that's possible. So as far as your camera settings go, you know, the one thing that I'll stress through this whole talk is that you need to experiment with the equipment that you have, with the area that you're in, and the skies that you're under. And so there's no hard, fast rules on anything. I leave my white balance set to auto because I shoot in RAW. I can change the white balance to whatever I want at any point afterward. If you're going to play around with white balance, you want to shoot somewhere between your tungsten setting, which is basically like incandescent light, and fluorescent. The color on fluorescent is about 3700 Kelvin, or 3800 Kelvin, right around there. You don't want to typically go above that, and you don't want to go below about 2600, which is tungsten. A lot of people will say just shoot at 3700 and leave your camera set there as a custom setting, but you know, it depends on what you want, what is aesthetic to you. Manual mode, obviously. Most of the cameras have high ISO noise reduction. And what that does is the camera does an in-camera dark frame. So you image whatever you're looking at, the shutter closes, and then it processes a second image with the shutter closed. And it looks for hot pixels, noise in the sensor itself, and then it'll do some mathematics in the camera, and it'll take those hot pixels and subtract them from your original image. So it actually produces a much cleaner, much more noise-free image. You can do it on your own. You can take your own dark frames and you can do some post-processing, but it's done pretty well inside the camera, so I never bother with it. And I never forget to take my dark frames because the camera does it automatically. Long exposure noise reduction, okay, just got those two mixed up. High ISO noise reduction, leave on normal. High ISO noise reduction is, again, it's doing some calculations inside the camera, but what it does is it looks for random hot pixels, random pixels that are bright. But we're imaging the stars, right? So all the stars are random hot pixels. So what it tends to do is take dimmer stars and it washes them out. You know, it negates them. And you don't want to do that. So leave that set to normal. The long exposure noise reduction is the one where it takes the dark frame. And that you definitely want to turn on. Just keep in mind that if you take a 30-second exposure, your camera's going to be busy for a minute, at least. Autofocus. You cannot autofocus at night. None of the cameras will do that. You have to manually focus. So you turn your autofocus off. And then if your camera lens is equipped with vibration reduction, then you want to turn that off as well. Anytime that you have a camera on a tripod, you want to turn off vibration reduction. The cameras will anticipate movement. If they see movement in the scene, they'll assume that it's camera movement, and they'll shift the lens element inside the lens, which can throw off your images, and I have an example of that as well too. So just keep that in mind if you have a DSLR. If you put it on a tripod, always turn off vibration reduction, no matter what you're imaging, what time of day, daylight, nighttime, it doesn't matter. You want it off. The last item is your mirror up, which is no different than the old film DSLRs. You don't want the movement of the mirror assembly swinging up and down to shake the camera. And a little bit of camera shake shows up in these images. So what it does is it swings the mirror up, gives you a second to let the camera, steady, and then you can trip the shutter, and only the shutter opens, which is a very small, very soft movement.
Not all these DSLRs have that feature.
No, they don't. So that's something to keep an eye on if you're looking for a camera. Make sure that it has a mirror up. And some cameras have mirror up, but it's only used for cleaning the sensor. You can't operate the shutter. So it's something to really investigate if you're looking to buy a camera to use for astrophotography.
But that doesn't necessarily have to be a deal breaker because
No.
You can have cameras with shock absorbers for the mirror that it'll flap, but still you won't notice it in the picture.
Yep, there are several things you can do. However, it's a hell of a lot easier to get a camera that has mirror-up functionality because those other, Brian, you're right, and I've tried some of that stuff with an old Nikon that I used to have that did not have a mirror-up feature, and I never had any success. It was cumbersome and kind of a pain to do it. And to tell you now, both my cameras allow me to do that, and it's a breeze. It's a dream.
Better to have it than not have it.
Yeah, absolutely. The last item is going back to focus. When you are focusing, you're focusing manually, and you're looking into a star field. This is not a telescope you're looking through. This is a small piece of glass at the end of the camera that has basically almost a negative magnification.
Yeah.
So you can't see the stars. Sirius, some of the brighter stars, they'll show up. So what most photographers will do is they'll rack the focus on the camera lens all the way to infinity, and then they'll just tweak it back a little bit. And then they'll take an image, and on the back of the camera you can digitally zoom into the image on the back of the camera, and they'll zoom in on the stars and see how they look, and then make a small adjustment, take another image, and they do that over and over again, and it's a really tedious process. But if you want the stars pinpoint sharp, you have to do that. The good news is, once you have it in focus, it's in focus for the night. All right, you don't have to touch it again, and you can image all night long. So take your time doing that focus the first time, and then you don't have to worry about it.
What's the purpose of backing it off from infinity just a little?
Because most of the camera lenses, they're not, when you rack them out to infinity, they
They
take
go a
the
little
camera
beyond.
The lens elements will actually go beyond infinity and back out of focus slightly.
Yeah, ideally if there's some way you can actually check the focus,
Right. Some people, the other thing you can do is some people will take the most distant object that they can see, focus on it at sunset, and then not touch their camera lens. But I've had really good success focusing in on the stars. My cameras actually, both of them are sensitive enough. If I put like that 1.8 lens on, where it's kind of, I told you it was a fast lens, I can see brighter stars, second or first magnitude stars. I can see in the live view, and I will actually, in live view, I'll digitally zoom in as far as I can, and I'll focus in on that single star. And then when I start imaging, the stars are just pinpoint tack sharp.
Also, you may get a lens that won't focus quite to infinity. I've had that happen once. So I just grab hold of the focusing ring and just manually just you know, as hard as I could and got it to focus all the way. I wouldn't recommend that, but it might work.
So there's a few rules, not many. Rules of thirds that, you know, well, I guess I won't walk out of the camera here. The rules of thirds are, if you segregate your field of view into thirds, okay? You draw 2 lines horizontally, 2 lines vertically, and try and put your objects, your subject to your image on those points where the lines intersect, or somewhere along those lines where it puts them in 1/3 of the picture, either a third of either side, or you know, toward the top, toward the bottom. And you know, if you Google rules of thirds, you will get excellent explanations of exactly what that is. And it's kind of a golden rule for photography, so you should apply it across the board anytime you're taking photos. But keep it in mind for astrophotography as well. The other thing is always have a point of interest. There's nothing more tiring or boring to look at than just a plain star field with nothing in it, right? You need the Milky Way, you need a constellation, you need a planet, the moon, even foreground. You know, if you have some interesting foreground that's lit by an even star field behind it, then it becomes very interesting. But just a, you know, frame filled with evenly illuminated stars is, you know, it's just boring.
That's what they wrote on the back of your picture, isn't it?
Well, it's one of the things. I told you they were harsh.
Maybe a better
The other,
Depends
the
on the
other-
stars.
Yes. They never got astrophotography. I mean, that was 1974 or 75. So, you want to, if you have the horizon in the field of view, maintain a horizontal horizon, right? Nice and straight.
Joe, make sure you talk about the 600 rule.
I'm glad you brought that up. The 600 rule. You take the focal length of your lens, you take 600 divided by the focal length of your lens, and that gives you the maximum number of minutes that you can image for without star trailing. The problem with doing that is it doesn't always work out. It's good for a general rule of thumb, but I can tell you, you probably never, ever, ever want to go over 15 seconds on any single image. So, like I said, I'm shooting with my Nikon D7100 in the 35mm lens. It actually shoots as a 50mm lens, and that's because it's a crop sensor. I'm going to step over here for a second, but if you look at these images here, this is the frame, the pixel area of a full frame sensor. The second Nikon I have is a crop sensor, and it's actually this one right here. It's called a 1.5 crop. And they get smaller as you go along. A small point and shoot camera might be imaging with this tiny little sensor right in the middle. Now, both of my cameras are 24 megapixel. So I have one camera that's 24 megapixels, so there's 24 million pixels in this area right here. Okay? I have a second camera that's got 24 megapixels on the crop sensor, so it's got 24 million pixels in this smaller area. It means the pixels are smaller, and there's two things that work against you with that for astrophotography. One of them is the pixel's smaller, so it collects less light, and the pixel's smaller, it can't see color as well. So the larger sensor delivers much better color, and it collects light much quicker. So it produces a better image. That's also benefits you when you're imaging star fields without some kind of tracking platform. As you know, stars near Polaris don't move as fast for a given period of time as stars near the celestial equator. Okay, so I mean, you can look at this example. We have a 19-degree movement here, a 19-degree movement here for the exact same amount of time. So if you're imaging closer to the North Star, you can image longer with it being a less of an influence on your images. And when you talk about trying to minimize the smearing of starlight across pixels, if you have a larger sensor, then the movement is across fewer pixels, right? So it doesn't show up as a star trail quite as easily. So my crop sensor camera is going to show star trailing much quicker than my full frame camera will, even though they're basically shooting the same image in the same resolution. That make sense? Okay, so if we're shooting with a fixed tripod, we want solid ground, nice, heavy, steady tripod, and fast glass, because we're not tracking the image. We want to get in there, get our image, and be done with it. This is up in the thumb, pretty poorly light polluted area. Well, actually it's not a bad area. It's kind of like Stargate, right? Stargate doesn't have great skies, but they're not bad considering how close it is to metropolitan Detroit. This is an ISO 800. It's a 24mm lens and a, not really a fast lens at all. It's f3.5. It's a 30-second exposure. So what I did is I doubled the ISO. I cut the shutter speed in half, and I was able to stop collecting so much of the light pollution, get a little better color in the star field, and not so much light pollution.
Scorpio.
Yes, in case you're curious, that's Scorpio, or that's Sagittarius right there.
That's Scorpio too,
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, you can see it better off to the screen. Sagittarius is my favorite area of the sky to image, hands down, without a doubt. Well, probably anybody.
Hands up in that image, though.
Yes.
You got
Use a flash to illuminate.
So
You got Joe Tocco in that shot.
that was actually, I ran out there. John Lyons from the Seven Ponds Club turned my red light flashlight on for about 2 seconds at the tail end of that exposure, and kind of lit me up a little bit. That's called light painting. I have more examples of that as we go. So here we have ISO 1600. This is a 35mm 1.8 at 15 seconds. Effectively, it's the same image as the previous images that were taken at Fowler Center, except number one, this is Arizona, right? Which has amazing skies. And this is a 1.8 lens. And the exact same area. So, ugly. So, that's Sagittarius. That's Sagittarius. And that's, the skies, yes, that's part of it. Dark skies, but most of it is the difference going from an f3.5 to an f1.8. So this is up in Cadillac, ISO 800, and again it's a kind of a slow lens, a 4.5. So I boost the shutter speed. Oh, not boosted, but slowed down. Sorry. Each time, these images are only a few seconds apart, but you can see the difference going from 1/60th of a second to 1/4 of a second to a half a second. I was just trying to get the Earth shine on the moon, which I finally got to show up here. I don't know how well it shows up on the lens, but you see it well? Good. So again, we're back here in Arizona.
Could you go back to the last one, please?
Yep.
Okay, that's the Earth shining a little bit.
So again, we're back here in Arizona. 15-second exposure, and that field is filled with all sorts of stuff. This is the same image. Everything stayed the same, but we just increased the ISO a little bit. Okay, so boosting the ISO from 1600 to 2500.
You got a video in there too.
Yep. There's a plane off on the left and a meteor on the right. Okay, if we crop that image, this image right here, which looks nice pinpoint stars, if we crop it and zoom in, you can see the stars are trailing. So it's not really a problem if I'm always going to use this image. But if I want to crop down and, this is a 24 megapixel image. And if I wanted to grab this section of it and turn it into an image, I could still have a 6 megapixel image to deal with. That's significant. But the problem is when I do that without a tracking platform or with too slow a shutter speed, this is 15 seconds again, you can see the stars start to trail. So really, the image breaks down quickly when you try and crop it. You know, the images don't have to, the star fields don't have to be in focus to make an interesting photograph. I actually like defocused stars because the colors are really intense, obviously. And you know, you can focus the stars and soften the foreground, or you can work ways to do, you know, maintain both focus on the foreground and on the stars. And really, what I'm doing here is playing around with the f-stop. Right here, I'm at f1.8, so I can shoot real fast. But in order to get everything in focus, I had to slow the lens down. So I dropped it down to f3.5, but then I had to boost the ISO and lengthen the shutter speed. So it's it's a constant balance depending on what you want to
How
do.
did you get the guy to stay still for 15 seconds?
Yeah, well, you can see a little bit of blur in them, but it's hard not to move. You know, I mean, it's easy not to move when you're standing at that eyepiece, and that's that 36-inch telescope. Just to give you an idea, that we put a bino viewer, Williams bino viewer, no, I think Meyer bino viewer with 2 teleview eyepieces in it. And we looked at the Dumbbell Nebula, and I'm telling you, it looked like you could put your hands around it. It looked like a sphere. And M13 was just unbelievable. Words just can't describe it. So it's...
Wait, that was a binocular sort of attachment to the
Yep.
eyepiece?
Yep.
And you get a sense of the binocular vision?
Yeah,
Well, you don't get true parallax.
Right.
You can't see 3D, but your brain sure makes it look 3D.
Okay.
Yeah, it's remarkably close to a binocular view.
Basically, 2 eyes are better than 1.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think it is, like Jonathan said, it's playing games a little bit with your brain. This is an image that I took and timed with an ISS pass. And again, if you crop in on that image, you can see it breaks down pretty quickly.
Yeah. Those other satellites?
Pardon me?
There was other lines besides the IS.
Yeah, you know, I don't know if that's a,
Satellites?
I don't know if those are satellites or if those are, because each one is going in a different direction. It's not an aircraft. The aircraft look like that.
Yeah.
So an aircraft can either ruin your image or they can make it a little more interesting. I'm pretty tolerant of aircraft. I don't mind them unless I'm trying to image without one. But if they show up, then that's okay. Clouds are not always a calamity. Sometimes they create some interest in your image.
Is that Andromeda there?
That is Andromeda, yes. This is high ISO, 3200, but very slow lens at f3.25. And you can see, you know, how much dimmer this image is. This is Sagittarius. Okay, same image, same ISO, but a 1.8 lens. So you can see what a fast lens does for you.
Joe, is it easy to change ISO in the, you know, between exposures and,
Yeah.
you know, is there just a matter of switching?
Yep. Yeah, most cameras there's like a fast button. You don't even have to go through the menus.
Okay. So you could do it by sense of touch, really.
Yep. Yep, I do.
So you have to turn lights on and everything. Okay.
Yeah. Well, I have a little headlamp that I turn on and off because I don't have all of my camera functions memorized, but ISO, white balance, and shutter speed and aperture I can get to pretty quickly with just kind of feeling around. So that's a 5-second exposure, and if I boost it to 15 seconds, even though I brought the ISO down, you can see the amount of detail that comes through. Now again, those are areas that have no, there's almost no light pollution out there. So that makes a big difference. Now this is kind of an area, what I was talking about before, if that telescope and ladder weren't in the foreground, and it was just that field of view, I mean, there's nothing in that, there's nothing of interest there. Just tiny little white dots. And from this perspective, okay,
Digging deeper, man.
I know. Obviously, there's some star fields that you don't even have to worry about a foreground. You don't even
By the
want it.
airport, where are you on?
Those, I don't know where those would have been going. It's, Overguard is 2 hours east of Flagstaff. So I'm not sure what is, yeah. So
Planes are going east-west?
those were going north-south.
Do planes
This
have a fit, or do, I guess it's probably not all planes have the same frequency of their blinking, or is it relatively fixed? Because that looks like about one.
No, I think they're
1%.
fixed, but they have different lights for different purposes. They
Oh,
don't
okay.
always have their anti-collision lights on.
Okay.
They only turn those on when there's aircraft in the area or they're coming into a real active space, so.
So
And then
these
some of the
two would,
navigation
because
lights
they're sort of
blink.
facing each other.
It could be.
But you, if you know.
Usually you
50
see an amber, or a green or a red light, right, depending on which direction they're going.
But knowing it's 15 seconds, you could figure out their frequency. The blinking
Yeah,
frequency.
sure.
Yeah.
So here's some more of the light painting that I was talking about. It's just a red flash, red light that it's a 15-second exposure, so I had somebody take my red light, just turn it on for a couple of seconds while I stood by the telescope and turn it back off. I could have walked away and the camera never would have recorded me being near the telescope. So you can do some creative stuff. That obviously left the light on a little longer in that one. This is only a 4-second exposure at ISO 6400. And the new cameras, 6400 used to be really grainy, terribly grainy. And these images, hold up remarkably well. What I wanted to show you here is the difference between framing from a landscape view to a portrait view. It's the exact same settings, the exact same camera and lens. I just turned it sideways and it looks substantially different. That's what happens when you don't tighten your tripod. So, although I like the image. I don't know why. It's relaxing. It just
The camera
relaxes.
was nodding back or nodding up.
Something. Okay, so I don't know how easy it is to see, but there's a couple of little spikes. If you look at Orion's belt here, you see the little points that are sticking down off those stars?
Yeah.
I sent that image to Nikon to figure out what was going wrong with my, brand new camera that I absolutely love. And they said, oh, you left a vibration reduction on. That was an internal lens, a lens group that shifted, and that's what was happening. I had it on a tripod, but the camera, for some reason or another, thought there was going to be movement, so it anticipated the movement, shifted the lens group, and screwed up my image. Another image, more light painting. You can, you don't have to use red light, but if I used a white light, I probably would have been chased out of Overguard. This is an image I took up in Charlevoix, and this is Orion. You can see, picking out from behind the tree. And I was trying to get some of the detail to show up in the tree by playing around with the settings, and I boosted the ISO, and that really didn't do it. So I brought the ISO back down, and I lengthened the shutter speed, and I finally got the, you can see the green, the detail in the tree there, and along with the star field behind it. So again, you have to experiment with your camera settings. You have to experiment with the area that you're in. The ambient light might be mercury vapor, it could be sodium vapor, metal halide, or a lot of LED lighting now. So you don't know how that's going to affect the cameras. This is Eton, Ontario, which is 4 hours north of Sault Ste. Marie, Canada. It doesn't get much darker, and you can see the, some of these are older images, and I haven't played around with the white balance at all, but you know, this is the only area I've ever shot where the skies look black out of the camera. This is cranked way up at 2800 or 28,000 ISO. Sorry, 12,800 ISO, which is kind of ridiculously fast. And you can see, I don't know if it's showing up again on the big screen, but you can see some of the graininess kind of coming through. But this was it's a slow lens. It's f3.5, but only a 6-second exposure.
Is that graininess showing up sort of as horizontal streaks?
Yep.
Yeah. Yep. So this is up in Cadillac. This is the 35 millimeter, the cheap, you know, $160 lens that I have. A 6-second exposure, and you can see Andromeda. And down to the right, you can see, I think it's Triangulum M33.
Yep.
So boost the ISO. It's the same shutter speed, just boost the ISO. The image holds up pretty well, so I stuck with it. Okay, here's ISO 2500, but a very slow lens, right? F4.5, you got almost no detail. If I take that same image in a faster lens, it's even a slower shutter speed, and I get, you know, better image. Now, you can see some of the problem with faster lenses at anything below like f2.8, you start to get chromatic aberration, and you can see some of the stars up there look purple. You get some violet halos around the stars. You can take that away. You can do that at post-processing, but if you wanted to make it go away in the camera, then you just take your shutter speed. If it's starting to come through, you take your f-stop, and you know, you basically choke down the lens. Take it to f2 or f2.8. So this is so I think I mentioned at the last meeting that was only a couple of days ago. I was up in Garland at the golf resort. So I had my camera. I take my camera everywhere, but it was in Lewiston, and there's nothing around Lewiston besides this golf resort in the little town of Lewiston. And it was dark, and it was this past weekend, so there was basically no moon. Certainly not at 11 o'clock at night. So I walked out to the green on the 7th fairway, and I set up my tripod and did a quick focus, and I shot a couple of images. Not as good as Arizona, but not bad. And certainly not I mean, most of those really great shots in Arizona were 15-second exposures. You know, the best I could do without really getting any noticeable star trailing, because I knew I wanted to be able to crop these down a little bit. So I limited it at about 8 seconds. But still came through pretty nicely. And I could go in post-processing. That's pretty much what my camera grabbed. I could go into post-processing and really kind of turn those into incredible images, but they don't look real to me. You know, it's, I think some people really push the extremes in post-processing on a lot of images, especially of the Milky Way. So I like kind of a more natural look. This is another image, Andromeda up at the top, and M33 down at the bottom right. Does anybody know what's to the left? About the same elevation as M33. There's, I don't know if that's an open cluster.
Is it the double cluster?
I don't think it's the double cluster.
Could be.
I think that's further.
Yeah, that's yours.
I don't know what that is. I was going to look that up, but never had a chance.
Give me a second.
All right, so tracking platforms, I talked about those a couple of months ago, but I wanted to revisit it for anybody that hasn't seen that. They take the camera and they move the camera to compensate for the rotation of the Earth. Everything applies to the tracking platform that applies to a standard tripod. You have to be on solid ground, a good steady tripod, and you still want a fast lens. Some people get a little too excited about new astronomy, but you know, I was pretty excited when I got this.
Any day can be Christmas.
That's right. So this is at Stargate, and this was a whopping 30-second image. But, you know, I didn't know how to go with this. I had, I knew I could image a lot longer than 8 to 15 seconds. So I thought, well, I'll take my ISO way down so that, you know, I got really low noise and it would be a really cool image. But all it did is collect a lot of light pollution. Also, I get these really, I don't know if you can see these, but there's like these halos
Yes.
right through here.
Yeah.
I don't know where those came from. It's very strange, but
That's because you increase the seconds of exposure?
well, it could be noise. It could be noise being produced by the sensor,
Okay.
for sure.
But it's an odd, you know, feature of the noise to go circular rings like that.
Right.
Are these from the
Circular
original
rings,
laws or
not
JPEGs?
These are, well, these are JPEGs, but
Because
I
if you take a
but I
JPEG,
saw
that will give you that.
I saw them in the raw files.
The compression will give you that artifact if you go to a JPEG.
You saw them in the raw, though, you said?
Well, these aren't. These are
Yeah, these are
That's what it
JPEGs.
was.
But you said you saw
But-
them in the raw.
And I'm pretty sure I saw these in the raw files, but now I'll have to go back and check that, Bob. I know that producing, when you do post-processing, you can create a lot of artifacts. And I've since learned some of the things not to do when I post-process to prevent that. Like I wanted to reduce chromatic aberration, so I pushed the slider way to the right, this one particular slider, and all the chromatic aberration went away. And then I got these perfectly square magenta boxes around each star. Like, where did those come from? So you know, everything's a learning curve.
So your stars stay fixed and now your trees trail, right?
Exactly, right. They do, they do.
Yeah.
So I boost the ISO here, and again, it's collecting light pollution.
Yeah.
As well as the
NGC
starlight.
752.
Yeah,
What kind of function
okay.
is that?
Anybody see Lovejoy?
Triangle.
There, it's in this one.
Off to the right.
Yeah.
Triangle.
Yeah. What else do we have? Well, here's some images from up in Eton, Ontario. It's my buddy's place up there. He calls it Wolfwood Lodge. Now, all right, here's an image. This is an image in Waterford of Orion. 67 seconds. I thought, man, I'll get pinpoint stars. I'll get all this, you know, incredible images of Orion. And, you know, of course, I'm thinking, oh, I'll get the Horsehead and Barnard's Loop and all these other cool things. And all I collected was massive amounts of sodium vapor.
So if you stop down the, or pardon me, if you drop the ISO on that shot
Yep.
and increase the shutter, the tracking time, would you get much improvement?
You know, you can't avoid it, and that's, you asked me about a light pollution filter. That was one of the reasons I put this slide in here. They make light pollution filters for cameras, and I'm going to try one and see how that does, because that could take, you know, a lot of this light pollution away and get me, you know, back to being able to image from the house. Bob, you probably
Yeah, I've
have
got
done
a
that.
couple, and like IDAS filters and this type, and they make a little bit of difference, but it's not gonna make a huge amount of difference.
No.
Did you turn
So-
off your long exposure noise reduction at this point, because you're having problems and shoot dark frames?
I don't know how much that would help. I mean,
I
it
don't
would
think
be worth
anything helps. I mean,
trying.
the light is there.
Yeah,
I
I
see
mean,
this all the time, and it's taken away when I shoot in the raw with darks and
Yeah.
flat frames afterwards. This is gone.
maybe I'll try that.
Move to a dark place.
One of the things I meant to say before I even got started with this presentation is that I am no astrophotography expert. There's a few people in here that know much more about this than I do. I'm just, you guys are on kind of the journey I've been on for the last 2 years, and I'm just revisiting, you know, where I've had success and where I've had failures, and trying to give you some insight that I've learned over the course of that. So I got a 10 millimeter fisheye, which really bends the images quite a bit. This is up at my buddy's place up in Ontario. He calls it Wolfwood Lodge. It's at mile marker 122 on the Agawa Canyon train, the snow train.
Yep.
It's easier to say snow train. So it's the only time the train stops is when he's actually on the train. And they stop there, they throw all our stuff in the snow, and then they drive away. And they come back the next day, but going the other way. So it's about as remote as you can get. And that's his place. This is how badly that lens bends the light. This is a straight railroad track right here. So, but this is when I first got. First of all, it's not a very bright area of the Milky Way. This is the northern. You know, this is looking basically north. Is this northwest? Yeah. So you can't see the southern Milky Way because on the opposite side of this train track is a 600-foot granite cliff. And, you know, you'd have to get up to the top of that. And there's lots of bears up here and stuff. I don't feel like going out that far at night. I didn't even want to be on these railroad tracks after about a half hour, honestly. I was like getting scared. So, if you let your brother after this, you know, who's an artist, he tends to you know, get a little carried away with color. He thought it was much better looking in blue and even better looking as a poster. But anybody watch Justified?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it's my favorite show. So that's our homage to Justified. This was up in Cadillac. This is some more wide field stuff. 6400 ISO. Only 6 seconds of tracking, but you know, some pretty cool images. Obviously, we were walking around with our red lights around the scopes. Okay, so successful planning. Obviously, that's the key to getting some good images. There's other factors that come into play that have nothing to do with your technical skill or anything else. So, this is an image of an area above Sagittarius. It includes the lagoon and the Trifid Nebula, and I think is it M22 on the left? What's the globular there?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, it's M22, and then there's an open cluster down on the right. But I love this image. This is my desktop image at the office. So the lagoon and the Trifid, and these were pulled. These are cropped down. Now this is the benefit of having the tracking platform. This is a much wider image that I cropped down and still had a usable image, a very high megapixel image. And these couple of images, I think it was either you or Bill Beers ended up doing some post-processing on these to bring out some of the color. So, and they turned out really nice, but those were recorded with just the standard DSLR. This one is a standard DSLR. This one as well. And there were single frame images. I haven't done any stacking there. If I did, the images would look even better. But this is a single frame image of Andromeda, M110 and M32. And you know, again, I cropped down on the image. So this was in Gladwin not too long ago. We were up there. There's a few of us up there, and this was right up on the observing hill. There was only 3 of us up there, and I looked up and I thought I saw a couple little wisps of light sticking up, and I grabbed my camera and I just rested it on top of a van and shot like a 5-second image, and immediately saw this is not handheld, but in that image I was able to see that there was definitely auroras, so then I set the tripod up and I shot this for only 5 seconds at 6400, but you can see the dipper there dipping.
The camera picks up the color better than our eyes do.
Oh, yeah.
It look that bright?
Absolutely.
When you were looking at it, the colors?
Yeah, it wasn't that bright.
Okay.
Definitely was not that bright. So
Were you experimenting with different ISOs to increase color saturation at all, or?
no, because they came and went pretty quickly. So I saw them coming through on the screen on the back of the camera. So I know I captured them and I was pretty happy. And then again, this is another image. This is a little tighter crop up in Cadillac. And that is the if anybody wants the PowerPoint presentation, you write down my email address there. You can email me and I'll probably send you a link to my Dropbox because it's a pretty large file. But I'll be happy to send it on if anybody's interested. Thank you very much.
Prepare your eyes. Any questions? We have about 1 minute.
Yes.
When you show different millimeters, 12, 30 something,
Yep.
was you changing lenses?
Sometimes, but the fast lenses, those are fixed. They're called prime lenses. So I have a 85 millimeter and I have a 35 millimeter, and they're not zoom lenses at all.
Right.
They're just a fixed millimeter lens. But if you see anything between like 12 to 24
Yeah.
or 70 to 200, those are the two zooms that I primarily use.
Okay.
But I try not to use the zooms if I don't have to, because they're slower.
Yeah.
Bob?
Yeah, Joe, I found a program, it's a free app. You guys have either a Canon or a Nikon, newer cameras. It's called DSLR Dashboard. And it's a free program, and it's for Android, for Windows, Linux, and also I believe they finished the Apple version. It's absolutely free, and allows you through a USB cable to tie into your camera, and all the settings are settable on your, like I have an Android tablet, settable from that. The live view, which is when you look through your camera, the little screen you have in the back of your camera, it shows up on your tablet. You can focus it on there. The images you take go both on your tablet if you want and your camera, whichever combination. But virtually all of the controls on your camera are settable from that, which is nice because those of you who have tried to do astronomy with a DSLR, and it's aiming at the sky, and you try to get your head behind and look through it, it's next to impossible. Now you can use your tablet and you can see the whole thing right on your tablet, and not the little TV screen, but 8-inch, 10-inch, whatever the tablet's trying to.
What was the name of the?
It's a DSLR dashboard, all one word. Huh?
There's four.
Yeah.
No, dashboard.
Yours is large, your D70, you have a
Yeah.
D70.
All right, was there another question?
I have a D70 also. That's really good. All the newer ones.
All right.
It works with Canon and Nikon.
Well, thank you for coming out. Remember, Astronomy at the Beach, we have flyers if you want to hand them out to anybody. And we will hopefully see you next weekend. And after our McComb meetings, many of us go to the National Coney Island on Van Dyke, just north of Belmont. So if you'd like to continue the discussion there, we'll see you there. Well, we can start in 5 minutes.
When you take a picture with your smartphone, how do you get it to your computer?